The desert doesn't forgive, and it doesn't forget. Silas Brennan learned that the hard way, dragging himself across sand that felt like broken glass under his palms. Blood soaked through the torn fabric of his shirt where claws had opened him up 3 days prior. In his coat pocket, a glass vial no bigger than his thumb, the last dose of medicine that could stop the infection crawling through his veins like poison. But when he found the young native warrior collapsed in the shade of a dead tree, bleeding from a wound that would take his life before sunset, Silas did something no one speaks of. He made a choice that defied every law of survival the frontier had taught him. What happened next would force a tribe to break a silence they'd kept for generations. And the ceremony they performed, witnessed by no outsider before him, would prove that some debts can only be paid in ways the world has long forgotten. Silas had been 3 days without water when the fever started. The grizzly had come at him from behind while he was checking his traps near the canyon mouth. He'd gotten his rifle up in time to take the shot, but not fast enough to avoid the animal's dying rage. One swipe across his torso, deep enough to matter. He'd stitched himself up with a leather cord in his own trembling hands, pressing dried herbs into the wound the way an old trapper had shown him once. But infection didn't care about field medicine. By the second day, heat radiated from the gashes. By the third, his vision blurred at the edges. The tincture in his pocket was worth more than gold out here. A traveling doctor had sold it to him for $20, his entire month's wages from selling pelts. Rare ingredients, the man had said. Imported. The kind of thing that could pull a man back from the edge when everything else failed. Silas had been saving it, waiting for the moment when he'd need it most. That moment was now. He'd been heading toward the settlement, trying to cover ground before his legs gave out entirely, when he spotted the figure beneath the tree. At first he thought it was a mirage, the fever playing tricks, but as he got closer the details sharpened. A young man, maybe 25, wearing traditional buckskin and a beaded vest. His chest rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths. Silas approached slowly, hands visible. The warrior's eyes opened dark and aware despite the pain etched across his face. A wound in his side, just above the hip. Fresh, the blood still wet. For a long moment, neither man moved. The desert stretched around them in all directions, empty and indifferent. No one else for miles. Just 2 dying men under a merciless sun. The warrior's hand moved toward something at his belt, then fell back, too weak. His lips moved, forming words in a language Silas didn't understand. But he understood the look in the man's eyes. The same look Silas had probably worn when the grizzly's claws tore through him. The look of someone who knew time was running out. Silas's hand went to his pocket, fingers closing around the vial. His own wound throbbed with each heartbeat, spreading fire through his gut. The tincture could save 1 life. Maybe. If used now. If used right. He pulled the vial out, held it up to the light. The liquid inside was dark amber, thick as honey. Worth $20. Worth surviving. Worth everything. The warrior's eyes followed the vial. He understood what it was, even if he didn't understand the words. Medicine. Hope. Life. Silas felt his knees hit the sand before he consciously decided to kneel. His hands shook as he uncorked the vial. The bitter smell of herbs and alcohol filled the air between them. He could drink it himself, save his own life, make it to the settlement, live to see another season. Or he could give it to a stranger. The warrior watched him, waiting, not begging, not asking, just waiting to see what kind of man Silas Brennan really was. Silas pressed the vial to the warrior's lips and tilted it forward. The liquid disappeared in 3 swallows. The warrior's eyes widened, then closed. His breathing steadied slightly, just enough to notice. Silas let the empty vial fall from his fingers into the sand. He'd just signed his own death warrant. And somewhere in the fever-bright corner of his mind, he wondered if anyone would ever know what he'd done out here. If it would matter. If giving your life for a stranger meant anything at all when the desert buried you both. The sun climbed higher. The heat pressed down like a physical weight. Silas lay back in the sand next to the warrior, staring at the cloudless sky. He'd done what he could. Now the desert would do what it always did. But what Silas didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that the warrior's people were already searching. And when they found them both, still breathing against impossible odds, they would face a choice of their own. One that would lead to a ceremony older than memory. One that no outsider had ever witnessed. One that would change everything. Silas woke to the sound of horses. His eyes opened to darkness. Not the darkness of night, something softer. Fabric. A shelter of some kind. His body felt like it had been dragged behind a wagon for miles. Every muscle screamed. The wound in his torso burned with a heat that made him gasp. But he was alive. That shouldn't have been possible. Voices spoke in low tones nearby. Not English. The words flowed together in rhythms he couldn't follow. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain lanced through his side, forcing a groan from his throat. The voices stopped. A moment later, the shelter's entrance opened. Light poured in, blinding after the dimness. Silas squinted against it, making out shapes. 3 figures. One stepped closer, and as his vision adjusted, Silas recognized him. The warrior. The one he'd given the medicine to. The young man was standing, moving, alive. His wound had been dressed with clean wrappings, and though he moved carefully, there was strength in his posture that hadn't been there before. His eyes met Silas's with an intensity that made the cowboy's breath catch. The warrior spoke, his voice steady despite everything. Silas caught one word that repeated. A name, maybe. Kitchi. The warrior pointed to himself as he said it, then gestured to Silas, asking something in return. Silas, the cowboy rasped, his throat raw as gravel. Silas Brennan. Kitchi nodded slowly, then turned to the others behind him. An older man stepped forward tall, with gray streaking through long hair bound at his neck. His face was weathered like old leather, eyes sharp and assessing. He studied Silas for a long moment, then spoke to Kitchi in rapid sentences. Silas didn't need to understand the language to read the tension in the exchange. The older man's tone carried weight, authority, and concern. Kitchi responded with equal force, gesturing first to Silas, then to his own wound, then to something outside the shelter. His voice rose with emotion, defending something, arguing. The third figure, a woman with silver streaking her braided hair, added her own voice to the conversation. Her tone was softer, but no less firm. She looked at Silas with something that might have been curiosity, or calculation. The debate continued for several minutes. Silas lay still, knowing better than to interrupt something he couldn't understand. His hand moved to his side, finding fresh bandages there. Someone had tended his wound, applied something that smelled of sage and other herbs he couldn't name. The fever that had been consuming him felt diminished, though not gone. Finally, Kitchi turned back to Silas. He crouched beside him, close enough that Silas could see the dried blood still staining the warrior's vest, close enough to see the seriousness in his young face. Kitchi placed his hand over his own heart, then reached out slowly, giving Silas time to pull away if he wanted, and placed the same hand over Silas's heart. The gesture was deliberate, meaningful in a way that transcended language. Then Kitchi spoke a single word, repeated it twice, his eyes never leaving Silas's face. Silas didn't know what it meant, but he understood that whatever was about to happen, whatever these people were deciding, his life hung in the balance of that conversation. The older man spoke again, this time with finality. Kitchi straightened, nodded once, and turned back to Silas. He gestured for the cowboy to stay where he was, then all 3 figures left the shelter. Alone again, Silas stared at the roof of hides above him. He was alive, against all odds. The warrior was alive. That part had worked, but now he was surrounded by people whose language he didn't speak, whose customs he didn't know, whose intentions remained a mystery. Outside, he could hear more voices gathering, many voices, the sound of a camp stirring to life, horses moving, the ring of metal on metal as someone worked. Something was being prepared, something important. And Silas Brennan, the cowboy who'd given away his last chance at survival, was about to discover what price that choice carried. By the time the sun reached its peak, Silas had been given water and something that resembled thin broth. The woman with silver hair brought it herself, watching to ensure he drank. She didn't smile, but her movements were gentle as she helped him sit upright against a bundle of furs. The wound in his side felt different, still painful, but the sharp, infected heat had dulled to something more manageable. Whatever they'd applied to it was working some combination of plants and skill that rivaled anything he'd gotten from a settlement doctor. Through the shelter's opening, he caught glimpses of activity. People moving with purpose, children being ushered away by their mothers, men speaking in tight groups, their faces serious. This wasn't the casual rhythm of daily camp life. This was preparation. Kitchi returned near midday, this time accompanied by the older man Silas had seen before. The elder carried himself with the bearing of someone used to being obeyed. He stood at the shelter's entrance for a long moment, studying Silas with eyes that seemed to measure more than just physical condition. Finally, he spoke. His voice was deep, each word deliberate. Kitchi translated through gestures and the few English words he seemed to know. It took time, patience from all three of them, but slowly Silas began to understand. The older man's name was Dakota. He was the leader of this band, the decision-maker, and he wanted to know why. Why would a dying man give his last medicine to a stranger? Why choose death over survival? Why show mercy to someone whose people and his own had been at odds for as long as anyone could remember? Silas didn't have a good answer. He tried to explain through Kitchi's halting translation, through gestures of his own, but the truth was simple and complicated all at once. He'd seen a man dying. He'd had something that could help. The choice had felt less like a choice, and more like the only thing a person could do and still call themselves human. Dakota listened without interruption. When Silas finished, the elder was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke again, and even without understanding the words, Silas heard the weight in them. Kitchi's face grew solemn as he listened. He looked at Silas, then back to Dakota, then to Silas again. Whatever was being discussed, it mattered deeply. The conversation continued outside, more voices joining. Through the opening, Silas saw a circle forming. 20 people, maybe more. Warriors with weathered faces, women with knowing eyes, even a few elders, their movements slow but purposeful as they took their places. The silver-haired woman entered the shelter again. This time she carried clothing, clean shirt made of soft hide, leggings, moccasins. She gestured for Silas to change, turning her back to give him privacy despite his weakness. He managed it slowly, every movement a negotiation with pain. The garments fit well enough. When he was done, she turned back, studied him, then nodded with something that might have been approval. Kitchi appeared again, this time extending his hand. Silas took it, letting the younger man help him to his feet. His legs trembled but held. The warrior steadied him, then guided him toward the entrance. Outside, the full scope of the gathering became clear. The entire camp had assembled, men, women, children forming a wide circle around a central clearing. Their faces were serious, expectant. This wasn't curiosity. This was ceremony. Dakota stood at the circle's center, waiting. When he saw Silas emerge, he raised one hand. The camp fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Kitchi led Silas forward, supporting him when his steps faltered. They moved toward the center, toward Dakota, toward whatever judgment or ritual awaited. As they walked, Silas noticed something that made his chest tighten. Every person in that circle was watching him, not with hostility, not with suspicion, with something he'd never expected to see. Respect. But for what? He couldn't yet understand. Dakota began to speak. His voice carried across the silent circle, each word measured and clear. Silas understood none of it, but he felt the weight of every syllable. This wasn't casual conversation. This was declaration, judgment, something that would define what happened next. Kitchi stood beside Silas, translating when he could through gestures and broken English phrases. The young warrior's face was serious, almost reverent, as Dakota spoke. The elder raised his hand, pointing first to Kitchi, then to Silas. He spoke of the desert, of finding two men near death under the merciless sun, of arriving just in time to see that one still breathed, because the other had chosen sacrifice over survival. Silas felt every eye in the circle on him, not hostile, not suspicious, something else entirely. Dakota's voice grew stronger as he continued. He gestured to the gathered people, speaking of their history, of the many times when conflict had defined the relationship between their people and those like Silas, of blood spilled on both sides, of distrust that ran as deep as the canyon walls. But then his tone shifted. He spoke of something different, a principle, a law older than the conflicts, older than the settlements and the treaties and the broken promises. Kitchi leaned close to Silas, struggling to find the right words. He says, "You give life, not take. You give, when dying, yourself." The elder continued, and Kitchi translated piece by piece. The concept was complex, but slowly Silas began to grasp it. In their tradition, when someone sacrificed their own survival to save another, particularly someone from outside their own blood, It created a debt that couldn't be measured in horses or goods or gold. It was called something Kitchi couldn't quite translate. The closest he could manage was chosen brother. Not family by birth, but family by choice, by action, by proof of character that transcended the accidents of heritage. Takota's words grew more formal. He described the ceremony that would follow, a ritual performed only when someone had earned this title through actions that proved their heart. Silas's chest tightened as he understood. They weren't punishing him. They weren't simply grateful. They were about to honor him in a way reserved for only the rarest circumstances. The elder turned directly to Silas, switching to heavily accented English that clearly took effort. You, save Kitchi. You choose, his breath over yours. This, he paused, searching for words. This make you more than stranger. Takota placed his hand on Kitchi's shoulder, then extended the same hand towards Silas. You give him, tomorrow. We give you, belonging. The words hung in the desert air. Around the circle, heads nodded. Some of the women had tears in their eyes. Warriors who had probably fought people like Silas stood with expressions of approval. Silas didn't know what to say. His throat felt thick. He'd made the choice without thinking about reward or recognition. He'd simply done what felt like the only human thing to do. But to these people, it meant something profound. Kitchi spoke then, his voice carrying emotion that needed no translation. He addressed Takota, the gathered people, then turned to Silas. Even without understanding every word, Silas heard the young warrior's gratitude, his conviction, his insistence that what Silas had done deserved this recognition. Takota nodded slowly, then raised both hands. The circle shifted, people moving to create a clear path to the center. Two women came forward carrying bundles wrapped in soft leather. They placed them carefully on the ground before the elder. The ceremony was about to begin, and whatever it entailed, Silas realized with startling clarity, it would change him, mark him, connect him to these people in ways he couldn't yet fully comprehend. He thought of the empty medicine vial lying somewhere in the desert sand. That small glass container had held more than herbs and alcohol. It had held a choice, a moment that defined what kind of man he was. Now he was about to learn what that choice meant to the people whose warrior he'd saved. Takota unwrapped the first bundle with careful hands. Inside lay several items, a mixture of red clay and plant ash, a carved wooden bowl, strips of soft leather, and something that caught the sunlight, a small blade made of polished stone. The elder gestured for Silas to kneel. The cowboy's legs protested, his wound pulling with each movement, but he managed to lower himself to the ground. Kitchi knelt beside him, mirroring his position. The silver-haired woman stepped forward, joining Takota. She mixed the clay and ash in the bowl, adding water from a leather pouch until it formed a thick paste. Her movements were practiced, methodical. This was something she'd done before, though by the solemnity of the gathered crowd, not often. Takota began to speak again, his voice taking on a rhythmic quality. Not a song, exactly, but something close. The words rose and fell in patterns that suggested ritual, tradition passed down through generations. Around the circle, some of the elders joined in, their voices creating a low harmony that resonated in Silas's chest. The woman dipped her fingers into the paste and approached Silas. She paused, looking to Takota, who nodded. Then she reached out and drew a line across Silas's forehead. The mixture was cool against his sun-heated skin. She drew more lines, one down each cheek, one across his jaw. Each mark deliberate, placed with precision. When she finished with Silas, she turned to Kitchi and applied similar marks. The young warrior remained perfectly still, eyes closed, face composed. This meant something to him, something important. Takota took the stone blade and held it up for all to see. The crowd's chanting grew slightly louder. He spoke words that sounded like explanation, like history being recounted. Kitchi opened his eyes and whispered fragments of translation. Old way, binding way, make separate, together. The elder moved to stand between them. He placed one hand on Kitchi's shoulder, the other on Silas's. When he spoke this time, his voice carried across the entire gathering with authority that demanded attention. He talked about the desert, about life and death, about the moment when two paths crossed and one man chose to give rather than take, about how such a choice revealed the truth of a person's character more clearly than years of words ever could. Then Takota did something Silas didn't expect. He took Kitchi's hand and pressed the stone blade lightly against the young warrior's palm. Not cutting, just touching, a symbolic gesture. He did the same with Silas's hand, the cool stone pressing against his calloused skin. The elder spoke a phrase 3 times. Each repetition grew more forceful. Around the circle, the gathered people responded in unison after each one. Call and response, question and answer, old as the land itself. Dakota then took both men's hands, Kitchy's in his right, Silas's in his left, and brought them together, palm to palm. The clay marks on their faces identical, their positions mirrored. The elder wrapped a leather cord around their joined hands, binding them together. Not tight enough to hurt, but secure, unbreakable without deliberate effort. He spoke more words, faster now, building toward something. The woman brought forward the second bundle. When she unwrapped it, Silas saw a necklace made of bone beads, eagle feathers, and a single carved stone pendant. She held it up for the crowd to see, and a murmur of recognition rippled through the circle. Kitchy's eyes widened. He said something quickly in his own language, surprise evident in his tone. Dakota responded firmly, his expression leaving no room for argument. The woman approached Silas with the necklace. She held it before him, letting him see the intricate carving on the stone symbols he didn't recognize but could sense held meaning. Then she placed it around his neck. The weight of it settled against his chest, light but present, impossible to ignore. Dakota released their bound hands and stepped back. He addressed the crowd with finality, his voice carrying the weight of completed ritual. When he finished, the entire circle erupted, not in chaos, but in affirmation, a sound of approval, of acceptance, of something profound having been witnessed. But the ceremony wasn't finished. As the crowd's voices settled, Dakota turned back to Silas and Kitchy, with an expression that suggested the most important part was yet to come. Dakota gestured for both men to stand. The leather cord had been removed from their hands, but Silas could still feel the phantom pressure of it. The clay marks on his face had begun to dry, pulling slightly at his skin. The elder spoke again, this time directing his words specifically at Kitchy. The young warrior listened with an expression Silas had not yet seen on his face, something between pride and humility. When Dakota finished, Kitchy responded with a single word, then turned to face Silas directly. What happened next would be the moment no one spoke of, the part of the ceremony that remained between those who witnessed it and the desert wind. Kitchy removed something from his belt-a-knife in a beaded sheath. Not for use, Silas understood immediately, but for display. The young warrior held it flat across both palms, offering it forward in a gesture that spoke of trust. He said something in his language, voice thick with emotion. Dakota translated this time, his English slow but clear. He says, "You could have taken, when he lay dying, you could have taken everything, his weapons, his belongings, left him for the buzzards." The elder paused. "Instead, you gave. You gave what you needed most." Kitchy continued speaking, and this time he lowered himself to one knee before Silas. The gathered crowd fell silent. Even the children who had been fidgeting stood perfectly still. The young warrior placed the knife on the ground between them, then both his hands over his heart. He spoke words that needed no translation. Gratitude, respect, recognition of a debt that could never be fully repaid. Then he did something that made Silas's breath catch. Kitchy bowed his head. A warrior, a man who had probably fought and survived countless dangers, bowing to a stranger who had simply done what felt right. Dakota's voice cut through the moment. "Now you." Silas blinked. "What?" The elder gestured downward. "You kneel. Face him. This is how it is done." Silas's legs protested as he lowered himself to one knee, mirroring Kitchy's position. The wound in his side pulled, but he ignored it. This was more important than pain. They faced each other now, both on one knee, the knife resting on the earth between them. The entire tribe watched in a silence so complete Silas could hear his own heartbeat. Dakota moved to stand behind Kitchy, placing both hands on the young warrior's shoulders. The silver-haired woman moved to stand behind Silas, her hands settling on his shoulders with surprising gentleness. The elder began to speak. His words rose and fell in the rhythmic pattern Silas had heard before, but now there was something different in the cadence, something final. He spoke of two paths that had crossed in the emptiest part of the desert, of a choice that revealed the best of what any person could be, of blood that was not blood, but stronger for having been chosen. Around the circle, the gathered people began to echo certain phrases, response to Dakota's call, affirmation of what was being declared. The elder's hands pressed more firmly on Kitchi's shoulders. The woman's grip on Silas tightened in the same way. The old man spoke 3 words short, powerful, and the entire tribe repeated them in unison. Then Dakota said something that made Kitchi's eyes widen. The young warrior looked up at the elder, surprise evident on his face. Dakota nodded once firmly, his expression brooking no argument. Kitchi turned back to Silas and did something that transcended every barrier of language and culture. He reached out and placed his hand over Silas's heart, holding it there. His palm pressed flat against the cowboy's chest, feeling the beat of life beneath skin and bone. Silas understood. He lifted his own hand and placed it over Kitchi's heart, feeling the same steady rhythm. 2 men, different worlds, same pulse. The tribe's voices rose together, not in song but in something older. Acknowledgement, witnessing, declaring that what had happened here would be remembered. Dakota removed his hands from Kitchi's shoulders. The woman released Silas. Both men remained kneeling, hands still pressed to each other's chests, surrounded by a circle of people who had just witnessed something their own histories rarely recorded. An outsider, accepted, honored, made brother not by birth, but by the kind of choice that defined what it meant to be human. When they finally lowered their hands and stood, Silas saw tears on Kitchi's face, and realized his own eyes were not dry either. The ceremony's formal portion ended, but its effects continued. Warriors approached Silas one by one. Each placed a hand briefly on his shoulder, or arm, a gesture of recognition. No words were needed. Their faces said everything. He had earned something that could not be purchased or demanded, only given. The women brought food and placed it before him and Kitchi. Not a meal, Silas realized, but an offering. The first portions from the evening's preparation, another mark of respect. He ate slowly, his appetite diminished by the weight of what had just transpired. Dakota sat across from them as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The elder watched Silas with those sharp, assessing eyes. Finally, he spoke. "You understand what this means?" His English was labored but clear enough. "This mark?" He gestured to the necklace still hanging around Silas's neck. Silas touched the carved stone pendant. It felt warm from resting against his skin. "I'm not sure I do. Not fully." The old man nodded as if he had expected that answer. "In our way. We have word. Closest in your tongue." He paused, searching. "Chosen kin. Made family." Kitchi added his own broken English. "Not guest. Not friend only. Brother. Same as born together." Dakota continued. "This mark, it tells our people. It tells other bands who know the old ways. It says you are," he struggled for the right phrase, "protected, welcomed, one of us." He leaned forward. "But also, it asks something of you." "What does it ask?" "To remember. To carry this," the elder tapped his chest over his heart. "To know that what you did in the desert, choosing life for another over your own, that is the best of what any person can be. Our people. Your people. All people." His weathered face grew more serious. "Too many forget this. They see only difference, only enemy, only stranger." He gestured around the camp. "Here, we remember. We honor it. That is why ceremony. That is why this." He touched the necklace. "So you never forget what you are capable of." The words settled over Silas like the cooling evening air. He had not thought beyond the moment in the desert, had not considered that his choice would mean something this profound to people he had never met. The silver-haired woman approached with a bundle. She handed it to Dakota, who unwrapped it carefully. Inside were several small leather pouches and a larger container made of carved wood. "Medicine," Dakota said simply. "Made by our healers. For wounds, for fever, for pain." He handed the bundle to Silas. "You gave yours away, now we give you ours." Silas took the bundle, the weight of it surprising in his hands. These were not simple offerings. These were the carefully prepared results of knowledge passed down through generations, worth more than gold in territory where a fever could mean death. "I can't." "You can," Kitchi interrupted, his hand on Silas's arm. "You must. Is done. Is decided." Dakota stood slowly, joints protesting the movement. "You are healing. Need more days before travel. You stay, rest, eat, grow strong." It was not a request. "When ready, you choose. Stay with us, or go to your world. Either way." He pointed to the necklace. "You carry this. You carry what it means." The elder started to walk away, then paused and turned back. "One more thing. This ceremony, We do not speak of it with outsiders. Not because shame, because sacred. Because it is for those who witness only. His eyes held Silas's. You understand? Silas nodded slowly. That was why no one spoke of it. Not because it was secret in the sense of hidden, but because it was sacred in the sense of deeply personal. A moment between people that could not be adequately explained to those who were not there. As night fell over the camp, fires were lit. The mood shifted from solemnity to something closer to celebration. Children laughed. People talked in animated voices. Someone began to play a wooden flute, the notes carrying across the desert. Silas sat beside Kitchi, watching the life of the camp unfold around him. The young warrior said something in his own language, then tried to translate. Before, you were dying, stranger. Now, you are brother who lives. He smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. Is better, yes? Silas found himself smiling back despite everything. Yes, much better. But as he sat there, the necklace heavy against his chest, the medicine bundle in his lap, he knew that when he eventually left this place, he would be leaving as a different man than the one who had crawled across that desert. The ceremony had marked him in ways that went deeper than clay and leather cords. He had learned what it meant to be seen. Truly seen, for the best of what he was capable of being. 5 days passed before Silas felt strong enough to travel. The wound in his side had closed cleanly under the careful attention of the tribe's healers. The infection that should have taken his life had been stopped by the combination of their medicines and rest. Each morning the silver-haired woman checked his injury, applied fresh poultices, and nodded with satisfaction at his progress. On the 6th morning, Silas stood at the edge of the camp, looking out at the desert that stretched toward the horizon. His horse had been found 2 days prior, grazing near a water source miles away. The animal had been brought back, fed and tended, ready for travel. Kitchi approached, moving with the easy confidence of someone fully healed. The wound that had nearly killed him showed only as a thin line of scar tissue now. He stood beside Silas in comfortable silence for a moment before speaking. You go today. It was not a question. Silas nodded. I've stayed longer than I should have already. There are people in the settlement who will wonder what happened to me. You could stay. Dakota has said, you are welcome. Always. Silas touched the necklace at his chest. He had not removed it since the ceremony. I know, and that means more than I can say. But I have a life out there. People who depend on me. Debts to pay. Work to finish. Kitchi was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled slightly. You will come back? I don't know. Silas answered honestly. Maybe, if the trail leads this way again. He turned to face the young warrior. But I'll carry this with me. What happened here? What your people did. I won't forget it. The medicine, Kitchi said, gesturing to the bundle secured to Silas's horse. Use it. Save others like you saved me. That is the true meaning of what we gave you. Dakota emerged from his shelter, moving slowly in the morning light. He approached the 2 men and looked at Silas with those sharp eyes that seemed to see more than surfaces. You are ready. I am, thanks to your people, to the healers, to you. The elder waved away the gratitude. You gave life. We return the favor. This is balance. He paused. But remember what I told you. That mark you wear, it means something. You are not the same man who crawled across that desert. No. Silas agreed quietly. I'm not. Dakota placed his hand on Silas's shoulder, the gesture carrying weight. Good. The world needs more people who choose to give rather than take. Who see person, not enemy. Who understand that survival means nothing if we lose what makes us human. He squeezed once, then released. Go. Live well. Honor what you learned here. The farewell was not elaborate. The tribe gathered, many hands touching Silas briefly as he prepared to leave. Recognition, respect, affirmation of what he had become to them. Kitchi walked with him to where his horse waited. The young warrior handed him a water skin, checked the security of his supplies, then stepped back. Brother, he said simply, the word in English, deliberate and clear. Brother, Silas echoed, the word feeling right in his mouth. He mounted his horse, settling into the saddle with only minor discomfort from his healing wound. The necklace rested against his chest, visible above his shirt, a mark anyone who knew the old ways would recognize. As he rode away from the camp, Silas did not look back, not because he wanted to forget, but because he knew he would carry this place with him regardless of distance. The ceremony, the acceptance, The proof that even in the harshest territory, human decency could transcend every boundary that hatred tried to build. The desert stretched before him, the same landscape where he had nearly died, where he had made a choice that had changed everything. The empty medicine vial was still out there somewhere, half buried in sand, a small piece of glass that had held the power to save a life. He had given it away, and in return, he had received something no amount of money could purchase. He had learned what it meant to be human in the fullest sense of the word, and he would spend the rest of his life trying to live up to that standard. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier, where honor and sacrifice meet in the most unexpected ways. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us. Some choices define a man in ways he never sees coming. Callan Mercer made his in the open desert, under a sun that showed no mercy, and in front of a woman who had every reason to take everything from him. He gave her his horse, his only horse, the animal that meant the difference between surviving out there and becoming another set of bones the wind would bury. What he didn't know was that by sunrise, that same woman would hand him the key to a fortune, and his barn would become something no one in that territory could ever imagine. The heat hit like a wall of fire. Callan pulled his hat lower, squinting against the glare that turned the desert into a sea of blinding white. His wagon creaked beneath him, wheels grinding through sand that seemed determined to swallow them whole. He'd been on this trail since dawn, hauling supplies back to the ranch, and every instinct he'd honed over 30-some years screamed that something wasn't right. The silence felt wrong, too heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. He glanced back at the horizon. Nothing, just endless rolls of sand and distant rock formations shimmering in the heat. But that prickle at the base of his skull wouldn't quit. The same feeling he'd had once before a storm tore through and leveled half his barn. His horse, a sturdy bay mare named Rust, snorted and tossed her head. She felt it too. Then he saw them. Shapes materialized from the dunes like ghosts taking form, rising from the sand itself. Riders. No, not riders. Warriors. Moving with purpose, fanning out in a wide arc that closed around him like a noose. Callan's hands tightened on the reins. His throat went dry. 8 of them, maybe 10. Too many to count in the shimmer of heat and dust. They carried weapons, bows, blades. One held a rifle that caught the sun and threw it back in his eyes. Callan stopped the wagon. Running would be suicide. Fighting would be faster suicide. So he sat there, hands visible, and waited. The warriors closed in, their horses moving with eerie coordination. No one spoke. The only sound was hoofbeats and the creak of leather. They formed a circle around him, close enough that he could see the markings on their faces, the beadwork on their clothing, the way their eyes tracked his every breath. Then she appeared. Callan had seen tall women before. His own mother had stood nose to nose with most men. But this woman towered over her warriors like a storm tower over hills. She sat atop a painted stallion, shoulders squared, spine straight, despite the way her left leg hung wrong in the stirrup. Even from 20 feet away, he could see the makeshift bandage wrapped around her thigh, dark with old blood and fresh seepage. She was hurt, badly. Her eyes locked onto his. No mercy there. No fear either. Just cold calculation like she was measuring him for a grave. She spoke. The language was sharp, clipped. One of her warriors translated. Your weapons, your water, your food. Give them. Callan's mind raced. He had a pistol under the seat, a rifle in the wagon bed. Neither would save him. But that leg, that wound, she wouldn't make it another day in this heat. Not with infection spreading like that. His gaze dropped to Rust. The mare stood calm, ears forward, oblivious to the fact that her owner's life was being measured in heartbeats. And something in Callan shifted. Maybe it was the heat. Maybe it was knowing he was dead anyway. Or maybe it was just that he'd seen too much death already, and adding one more to the pile felt wrong. He stood, slowly, hands still visible. You can have it all, he said, voice steady despite the hammer of his heart. But she needs help first. He pointed at the woman's leg. The warriors shifted. Weapons rose. But the woman raised one hand, and they froze. Her eyes narrowed, suspicious, confused, like he'd spoken a language she recognized, but couldn't believe she was hearing. Callan took a breath, committed. Take my horse, he said. She's strong. She'll get you wherever you need to go. The words landed like stones in water. Silence rippled outward. The woman stared at him, then at Rust, then back at him, and for the first time since she'd appeared, something flickered across her face, something that looked almost like shock. The woman stared at him for what felt like an eternity. Her warriors shifted, hands tightening on weapons, waiting for the order that would end this. Callan kept his hands where they could see them, his heart slamming against his ribs so hard he thought they might hear it. She spoke. One word, sharp as a blade. Her warriors lowered their weapons. Not by much. Just enough that Callan knew he wasn't about to be cut down where he stood. The woman dismounted, favoring her good leg, and the movement sent fresh blood seeping through the bandage. She limped forward, each step deliberate despite the pain that tightened her jaw. Up close, she was even more imposing. Shoulders broader than his. Arms marked with scars that told stories he didn't want to imagine. Her eyes held his, searching for something. Deception, maybe. Fear. A reason to distrust what he'd just offered. She gestured at Rust. One of the warriors moved forward, taking the mare's reins. Rust nickered softly, uncertain, but didn't resist. Then the woman pointed at Callan. Another command. The translator spoke. You come with us. Callan's stomach dropped. I gave you the horse, that was the deal. There was no deal. Her voice came out in accented but clear English, surprising him. Only your offer. Now you walk. Two warriors dismounted. They weren't rough, but they weren't gentle either. They stripped his gun belt, took the rifle from the wagon, emptied his canteen. One of them climbed into the wagon seat and took the reins of the mule team. Callan stood there, watching his only transportation disappear into someone else's hands. The woman mounted Rust with visible effort, biting back what must have been agony as she swung her wounded leg over. Once settled, she looked down at him. Walk, she said. Keep pace or be left. They moved. The sun climbed higher. Callan's boots sank into sand with every step, and the heat pressed down like a physical weight. The warriors rode in formation around him, close enough to prevent any thoughts of running, far enough that he couldn't reach any of them. Not that it would matter. He'd be dead before his hand left his side. Rust carried the woman at the front. She sat straight despite everything, leading them northeast toward a range of broken hills that shimmered in the distance. Callan tried to track landmarks, tried to memorize the route, but the desert all looked the same out here. Endless, indifferent. His throat burned, his lips cracked. They'd taken his water, and no one offered him any. After what felt like hours, one of the younger warriors rode up beside him. The man looked barely 20, with keen eyes that kept flicking between Callan and the woman leading them. Why did you do that? He asked quietly. His English was rougher than hers, but understandable. Callan kept walking. Do what? Give her your horse, you could have fought. Died with honor. Dying's easy, Callan said, his voice hoarse. Living's harder, and she needed it more than I did. The young warrior studied him like he was something strange and unexpected. Then he pulled a water skin from his saddle and tossed it down. Callan caught it, drank deep, and handed it back without a word. The warrior rode ahead without acknowledging the exchange. They walked until the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of blood and copper. The hills grew closer, revealing caves and outcroppings that could shelter a small camp. Callan's legs screamed. His feet felt like raw meat inside his boots. Finally, the woman raised her hand. They stopped. She dismounted, and this time her leg buckled. Two warriors caught her before she hit the ground. She shoved them away, fury flashing across her face. But she didn't try to walk. One of them gestured at Callan. You. Sit there. They pointed to a flat rock near the center of what was clearly a temporary camp. Callan sat, watching as they moved with practiced efficiency, building a small fire, tending to horses, checking weapons. No one spoke to him. No one looked at him. But no one tied him either. And that scared him more than anything else they could have done. The fire crackled and spit as darkness settled over the camp. Callan sat exactly where they'd told him to sit, watching shadows dance across stone. His body ached in places he'd forgotten could ache. Thirst had given way to a dull headache that pulsed behind his eyes. Across the fire, the woman lay on a blanket while an older warrior worked on her leg. The bandage came off in strips, revealing a wound that made Callan's stomach turn. Deep gash, edges inflamed, the kind of injury that could kill slow or fast depending on luck. The older warrior cleaned it with something that smelled sharp and medicinal, and the woman didn't make a sound, didn't flinch, just stared up at the stars like she was somewhere else entirely. When it was done, freshly wrapped, she sat up and drank from a waterskin someone handed her. Her eyes found Callan across the flames. She said something to the others. They stood, moved away, leaving just the two of them with the fire between them. The young warrior who'd given him water earlier lingered at the edge of the light, close enough to hear, but far enough to pretend he wasn't listening. The woman studied Callan for a long moment. Then she spoke. "What is your name?" "Callan. Callan Mercer." "Callan." She tested the word like it was something foreign. "I am Dakota." He nodded. Didn't know what else to do. "Tell me why you gave me your horse." "Callan Mercer." There it was. The question he'd been asking himself since the moment the words left his mouth. He looked down at his hands, rough and scarred from years of work that never seemed to end. "Seemed like you needed it more than I did," he said finally. "I can walk. You couldn't. Simple as that." "Nothing is simple." Her voice carried an edge now. "Men do not give without wanting something in return. Maybe where you come from." Callan looked up, met her gaze across the fire. "Where I come from, sometimes a man just does what's right because he can't live with doing what's wrong." Dakota's expression didn't change. "You think I would have killed you. I think you could have. Whether you would have, I don't know. But that wasn't why I did it." "Then why?" Callan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. The words came harder than he expected. 6 months ago, I inherited that ranch from my brother. He died in his sleep. Heart just stopped. Left everything to me because I was all the family he had left. He paused, throat tight. I spent 40 years working land that belonged to other men, building things I'd never own. And when I finally got something that was mine, I got it because someone I loved was gone. So I look at that wound in your leg, and I think about how easily life ends. How quick it all goes away, and I couldn't take more than I'd already lost, you understand? Couldn't watch someone else die when I had the means to help. The silence stretched. Fire popped. Somewhere in the darkness, a horse snorted. Dakota's face remained unreadable, but something shifted in her eyes. Something he couldn't name. "Your brother's ranch," she said slowly. "Where is it?" Callan described the location. The old stone house, the barn with the crooked door, the well that ran deep and never dried. Dakota went very still. "What was your brother's name?" "Thomas. Thomas Mercer." "Why?" She didn't answer, just stared at him with an intensity that raised the hair on his neck. Then she stood, testing her weight on the injured leg. It held, barely. "You will stay here tonight. In the morning, we talk again." "About what?" Dakota looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time. Like she was seeing something beyond him, through him. "About what your brother took from us," she said. "And what that means for you now." She turned and limped into the darkness, leaving Callan sitting by a dying fire with questions that had no answers and a dread that settled into his bones like winter cold. Sleep didn't come. Callan lay on hard ground under stars that seemed too bright, too indifferent. Every sound made him tense. Every shift of shadow brought his heart into his throat. But no one approached. No one spoke. The camp settled into the rhythm of guards changing position, horses shifting weight, the occasional crackle of embers dying in the fire pit. When dawn broke, pale and cold, Dakota emerged from one of the makeshift shelters. She walked better today, the leg still stiff but holding her weight without the buckle from before. She gestured for Callan to follow. They walked beyond the camp, to an outcropping that overlooked the desert stretching endlessly to the west. The rising sun painted everything in shades of gold and red. Beautiful if you could forget where you were and why. Dakota stood at the edge, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the horizon. Callan waited. He'd learned that patience was the only currency he had left. "My people have lived in these lands for more generations than your people have words to count," she said finally. "We know every stone, every spring, every cave where water collects when rain comes." She paused. "We also know what lies beneath." Callan's mouth went dry. 20 years ago, my father found a place where the earth had opened during a storm. Inside, metal, yellow metal, more than any of us had seen in one place. She turned to face him. "We did not mine it, did not touch it. It was not ours to take. The earth keeps what the earth claims. But someone else did take it," Callan said quietly. "Your brother." The words came out flat, Final. He came to these lands 8 years ago, friendly, said he wanted to trade, offered fair prices for the animals we raised. We trusted him because he showed respect, because he learned our language, because he seemed different from the others who came only to take. Callan's chest tightened. He knew where this was going. He asked questions about the land, about places we considered sacred. My father, fool that he was, believed Thomas Mercer wanted to understand us. Dakota's jaw clenched. Instead, he used that knowledge to find the cave. He took everything, every piece of metal we had chosen to leave untouched. And then he disappeared. He built the ranch, Callan said, the pieces falling into place like stones into a grave. With our gold, with metal that belonged to the earth, not to him. Dakota stepped closer. My father died last winter still carrying the shame of that betrayal. His last words were an order. Find what was taken. Bring it back. Restore what was lost. Callan met her gaze. I didn't know any of it. Thomas never told me how he got the money for that place. I just thought he'd saved it, worked for it. And now you own what he built with theft. The accusation hung between them like a blade. Callan took a breath. Let it out slow. What do you want from me? I want to know if you are like your brother. If you will lie and steal and dishonor the trust of those who show you mercy. Her eyes bore into him. Or if you are something different. I gave you my horse. Yes, you did. Something flickered in her expression. That is why you are still breathing. That is why I am telling you this instead of simply taking what is owed. Taking what? The ranch? Dakota shook her head. Your brother did not spend all the gold. He hid most of it. We have searched for years, watched that ranch from afar, waited for him to lead us to it. She paused. He died before we could make him answer. But you inherited his land, his buildings, his secrets. Callan's mind raced. You think the gold is still there, hidden somewhere on the property. I know it is. Dakota's voice carried absolute certainty. And you are going to help me find it. Then you are going to give it back. And if I refuse? She didn't answer. Didn't need to. They both knew what refusal meant out here. Callan looked out at the desert, at the ranch that lay somewhere beyond his sight, at the inheritance he'd mourned and cherished and built his last hopes around. When do we leave? He asked. They reached the ranch by midday, the sun climbing to its peak as the stone house came into view. Callan's heart twisted seeing it like this, surrounded by armed warriors, no longer feeling like his own. 6 riders, including Dakota on Rust, formed a loose perimeter, while Callan led them through the property he'd worked so hard to maintain these past months. The place looked different through their eyes, smaller, more vulnerable. The barn leaned slightly to the left, door crooked on old hinges. The corral fence needed mending in 3 places. The well stood solid, at least. Some things Thomas had built to last. Dakota dismounted, testing her weight carefully. The leg held. She surveyed the property with the focus of someone reading a map only she could see. He would not have buried it in the house, she said. Too obvious. Too easy for someone to discover by accident. Her gaze moved across the yard. Somewhere he could access it alone. Somewhere no one else would think to look. Callan thought about the months he'd spent here. The repairs he'd made. The corners he'd swept. The walls he'd patched. I've been through every inch of this place. Never found anything unusual. You were not looking. Dakota limped toward the barn. Show me inside. The door groaned as Callan pulled it open. Sunlight spilled across straw-covered floor, empty stalls, tools hung on walls. The space smelled of hay and old leather and honest work. Nothing valuable. Nothing hidden. Dakota stepped inside, her warriors fanning out behind her. She moved slowly, deliberately, running her hand along support beams, kicking at loose boards, studying the way shadows fell across the floor. The young warrior who'd given Callan water knelt in one corner, brushing straw aside to reveal nothing but packed dirt beneath. There, Dakota pointed at the back wall. That board sits different from the others. Callan looked. Saw nothing at first. Then he noticed it. One plank wider than the rest set slightly deeper into the frame. He'd seen it 100 times and never registered the difference. He crossed the barn, pressed his hand against the wood. It gave slightly. A hidden latch, so cleverly disguised he'd missed it completely. He looked at Dakota. She nodded. Callan pulled. The board swung outward on concealed hinges, revealing a hollow space behind the wall, and inside that space, Leather bags. Heavy ones. At least a dozen, stacked carefully, dust settling over them like burial shrouds. Dakota moved forward. Opened one bag. Gold coins spilled into her palm, catching the light streaming through the barn door. More than Callan had seen in his entire life. Enough to buy 10 ranches. 20. Enough to build something that could last generations. Stolen. All of it. He felt sick. Dakota stared at the gold, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to her warriors and spoke in their language. They responded immediately, moving to retrieve the bags. One by one, they carried the stolen wealth out of its hiding place, out into the sunlight where it could be seen for what it was. Callan stood in the empty barn, looking at the hollow space in the wall, at the dust patterns showing where the bags had rested all this time. His inheritance, his brother's legacy, built on theft and lies. Dakota returned alone. She studied him in the dim light. "Your brother was a thief," she said, "but you gave me your horse when I needed it most. You walked through desert heat without complaint. You stand here now and do not fight for gold that was never truly yours to keep." She paused. "You are not him." Callan didn't know what to say, didn't trust his voice. "We will take what belongs to us," Dakota continued. "But the barn is yours. The land is yours. What you make of it now is your choice." She started to leave, then stopped at the doorway. "The earth keeps what the earth claims," she said. "But sometimes the earth gives back what honor demands." And then she was gone, leaving Callan alone in a barn that suddenly felt like a tomb for dreams he'd never really owned. Callan watched from the porch as Dakota's warriors loaded the last of the bags onto their horses. The animals shifted under the extra weight, but they were strong, built for long journeys across hard country. They'd make it back to wherever they'd come from with the burden they carried. The sun had started its slow descent toward the western horizon. Soon it would be evening. Soon they'd be gone, and he'd be alone again with land that suddenly felt cursed. Built on theft, maintained through ignorance. What kind of man inherited something like that and just kept living in it? Dakota approached, still limping, but moving with purpose. She stopped at the base of the porch steps, one hand resting on the railing. "You could have fought," she said. "When we found it, when we took it. You had weapons in the house. Wouldn't have changed anything. Just would have gotten me killed. Perhaps. Or perhaps you understand that some debts must be paid, even when you were not the one who made them." She studied him with those intense eyes. "Your brother's choices are not yours, but you chose not to defend what he stole. That matters." Callan looked down at his hands. Rough, calloused, honest work, all of it, but built on a foundation of lies. "What am I supposed to do now? Just live here like nothing happened? You live here because it is yours by law and by loss. The land does not care how it was bought. The earth does not judge." Dakota paused. "But I will tell you something your brother never learned. Honor is not about what you own. It is about what you do when no one is watching. When the choice is yours alone." She reached into a pouch at her belt and withdrew something. A small leather bundle, worn soft with age. She placed it on the railing between them. "Open it tomorrow. At dawn. Not before." Callan stared at the bundle. "What is it?" "A choice." Dakota turned to leave, then stopped. "Your horse. Rust. She carried me well. Saved my life, I think. Such animals are rare. She's yours now. I gave her to you." Dakota shook her head. "No, you gave her to help me survive. I have survived. Now she returns to you." She gestured, and one of the warriors led Rust forward. The mare nickered softly, recognizing Callan, tossing her head with obvious relief. Callan descended the steps, running his hand along Rust's neck. The horse leaned into him, and something in his chest loosened. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Thank yourself. You earned her back." Dakota mounted her own horse, settling carefully into the saddle. Her warriors formed up around her, ready to move. "One more thing, Callan Mercer." He looked up. "My father used to say that the earth gives to those who understand its value. Not the value of what can be taken from it, but the value of what it offers freely. Water, shelter, life itself." She adjusted her reins. "Your brother took. You gave. Remember which one brought you to this moment alive." With that, she turned her horse and led her people away from the ranch. Callan watched them go, silhouettes against the lowering sun, until they disappeared into the landscape like they'd never been there at all. He stood alone in the yard, Rust beside him, and the leather bundle sitting on the porch railing like a question he couldn't yet answer. The barn loomed behind him, empty now of its hidden weight. Just a building again. Just walls and roof and space where honest work could be done. But the bundle called to him. Dakota's words echoed in his mind. A choice. Open at dawn. Not before. He led Russ to the corral, gave her water and feed, and spent the rest of the evening trying not to think about what tomorrow might bring. Trying and failing completely. Callan didn't sleep. He sat on the porch through the night, watching stars wheel overhead, listening to the sounds of the desert settling into its nocturnal rhythms. The leather bundle lay beside him, untouched. Dakota's words kept circling through his mind. A choice. Open at dawn, when the first pale light touched the eastern horizon, turning the sky from black to deep blue to burning orange. Callan picked up the bundle. His hands shook slightly as he unwrapped the leather ties. Inside, a map, hand-drawn on hide, marked with symbols he didn't recognize, and landmarks he did. The ranch was there, rendered in simple lines. The barn, the well, the stone house, and beyond the property line, marked with a symbol that looked like a spiral within a circle. Another location. Beneath the map, a note written in careful English. Your brother found one cave. He took what he found and called it fortune. But the earth keeps many secrets. This is the second cave. Smaller, hidden deeper. My father found it years after the first. He told no one because he knew that knowledge brings danger. I tell you because you proved yourself different. What you do with this knowledge is your choice. Take it and become what your brother was, or guard it and become something better. The earth watches. It remembers. It judges. Callan stared at the map, at the symbol marking a location less than 2 miles from where he sat. His heart hammered against his ribs. Another cave. More gold. He could take it, sell it, build something that would last, live comfortably for the rest of his days. Or he could walk away, pretend he'd never seen this map, let the earth keep what it had claimed. The sun broke fully over the horizon, flooding the land with light so bright it hurt to look at. Callan made his choice. He saddled Rust, took supplies for a day's journey, and rode toward the location marked on the map. The landmarks matched perfectly, a formation of 3 stones leaning against each other, a dry wash that curved like a snake, a cliff face split by ancient weathering. Behind that split, hidden so well he'd have ridden past it 100 times without noticing, a narrow opening. Callan dismounted, lit the lantern he'd brought, stepped inside. The cave was small, just as the note had promised, but what it contained made him stop breathing. Gold, not coins this time. Raw nuggets, dust, veins running through quartz like frozen lightning, enough to make a man rich beyond measure, enough to tempt any soul toward darkness. Callan stood there for a long time, lantern light dancing across stone and metal. Then he backed out of the cave, returned to his horse, and rode home. By noon, he'd moved every tool from the barn to the house, cleared the entire space, returned to the cave 3 times with saddlebags, moving carefully, watching for anyone who might follow. By sunset, the gold rested in the hollow space behind the wall where his brother's stolen fortune had been hidden. The barn had become a vault again, but this time, the gold inside belonged to no one. Not to him, not to Dakota's people, not to anyone who might come looking. Callan would guard it, keep it secret, let it remain what it was supposed to be all along. Something the earth held, watched over by someone who understood that true wealth wasn't about what you could take, but about what you chose to protect. He sealed the wall, scattered straw over the floor, hung his tools back on their hooks. The barn looked the same as it always had. Crooked door, leaning walls, nothing special, nothing worth a second glance. Perfect. That night, Callan sat on his porch and watched the stars. And for the first time since inheriting this place, he felt like he truly owned it. Not because of what he had, but because of what he'd chosen to do with what he'd been given. The earth watches. It remembers. It judges. And maybe, just maybe, it had finally found someone worthy of its trust. 3 months passed like water through open hands. Callan worked the land with renewed purpose, repairing fences that had sagged, clearing irrigation channels that had filled with debris, rebuilding the corral with timber he'd cut himself. The ranch transformed slowly under his labor, becoming something he could take honest pride in. The barn stood unchanged, crooked door still hanging on worn hinges, walls still leaning slightly left, But inside, behind that hidden panel, a fortune waited in darkness. Callan checked it once a week, making sure the space remained dry, that no animals had discovered the hollow. Each time he sealed it back up and walked away without taking a single piece. The temptation never disappeared completely. Some mornings he'd wake thinking about what that gold could buy. New equipment, better livestock, a life without the constant worry of drought or hard winters. But then he'd remember Dakota's words. The earth watches, it remembers, it judges, and he'd chosen to be someone worth remembering. On a morning when autumn first kissed the air with coolness, Callan found something on his porch, a single eagle feather, placed carefully where he'd see it first thing. Faint tracks in the dust led to and from the steps, barely visible, swept clean in most places but revealing the pattern of soft-soled footwear. In one spot the sweeping had missed. Beside the feather, 3 words scratched in the dust of the railing. You chose well. Callan picked up the feather, turned it in the morning light. Somewhere out there, Dakota was watching, keeping track of what he did with the gift she'd given him, the knowledge she'd entrusted to him. She'd traveled here in the night, moved with the silence her people had mastered over generations, left her message, and disappeared back into the territory she knew better than anyone. And she knew he'd made the right choice. He placed the feather on the mantel inside the house next to the few belongings his brother had left behind. A reminder, a marker of the day everything changed. Weeks turned into months. Winter came and went. Spring returned with its promise of renewal. Callan expanded his small herd, traded fairly with neighboring ranches, earned a reputation as a man of his word. People who'd avoided Thomas Mercer began stopping by, sharing news, offering help when storms damaged his property. The ranch prospered, not because of hidden wealth, but because of honest work and fair dealings. The irony wasn't lost on Callan. His brother had stolen a fortune trying to build something lasting. Callan had walked away from gold and built something real instead. The barn remained his secret. Some nights he'd sit inside back against the wall that held so much potential wealth and marvel at how much his life had changed. From a man who'd inherited shame to one who'd chosen honor. From someone living on stolen ground to someone the earth itself seemed to trust. He never touched the gold, never spent it, never spoke of it. The barn stood as his vault, but also as his reminder of the day he'd given his horse to a warrior who needed it more than he did, of the choice between taking and protecting, of the moment he'd decided what kind of man he wanted to be. And on clear nights when he sat on his porch watching stars wheel overhead, he sometimes caught sight of movement on distant hills, riders passing through, watching, remembering. The earth keeps what the earth claims, but sometimes it shares its secrets with those worthy of carrying them. Callan Mercer had become worthy, and that was worth more than any gold hidden in any barn anywhere in the world. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier, where honor and courage shape destinies in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.